Thanks for downloading a very special edition of the ThunderCast. I'm your host, KD Hudnall. As many of you know, I've been away from the microphone for a couple of weeks as my family and I have relocated from Florida to Kentucky. But man, oh man, what a way for me to get back in the swing of things. I have an unbelievably special guest with me today. He is the author of the Steele College Football Preview magazine, and a guy whose work that we lean heavily on to bring you our series of position group breakdowns for the herd each and every year. Ladies and gentlemen, I have the incomparable Phil Steele joining me today. Phil, thank you so much for setting aside a little bit of time, joining me on the ThunderCast and helping me get to know the herd a little better from your perspective.
Hey, always great talking Marshall football, KD. Thanks for having me on.
Man, the honor and privilege is all mine. Look, I know you're a very, very busy man, so let's get straight into it. It was a busy offseason for Marshall, coming off of a 6-7 season and a bowl game loss. Marshall is looking to install a brand new style of offense. Many are calling it an air raid. We at the ThunderCast are calling it a modified air raid. We simply don't think that we will see a true air raid despite the hiring of former Mike Leach quarterback Seth Dagey as offensive coordinator. Phil, given what you've learned about the herd from your own research and from head coach Charles Huff about Marshall, where do you think the pinch points are in this new offensive endeavor?
Yeah, and it was interesting. I talked to Coach Huff after I talked to Coach Aranda at Baylor. A great defensive mind, and Coach Aranda is making the same move to more of an air raid offense. And as you mentioned, it won't be a pure air raid, but it'll definitely have the tendencies of it. And I think it's a plus. It's something it's going to make the offense tougher to deal with. And as a defensive guy, like Coach Aranda is, he felt that it's tougher to deal with defensively. So I think it's going to be a plus for the offense as long as the new quarterback sets up well.
Yeah, that's the big question mark, right? Is quarterback. We saw last year's quarterback Cam Fancher hit the portal now at FAU. Young Cole Pennington made a couple of starts. Obviously, he's in the mix this year. Marshall brings in Braylon Braxton from Tulsa, gets a little bit of a knock on the chin when Wake Forest transfer quarterback Mitch Griffiths decides to retire from football. Phil, do you think Marshall is done at quarterback right now, or do you think maybe we see a late addition to add one more arm to the mix?
Yeah, I imagine if there's somebody floating around there in the portal that's worth bringing in, they might. But we'll have to see how Pennington and Braxton grasp the offense during the August practices as well. And don't discount the true freshman either in Long. I think he's a guy that could surprise this year.
I think a lot of folks are excited about Ja'Kai Long, of course, local kid, Hurricane, legacy player, dad played with the herd back in the MAC era with Moss. So a lot of history there. I think a lot of folks are excited about Ja'Kai Long, like you said. So from a personnel standpoint, what position groups to you are the strongest on this herd offense?
To me, the one that has me most excited, and the reason I picked Marshall to finish tied for second in the East, is the defensive line. And, when I talked to Coach Huff last year, they were coming off a performance where Marshall's defense was absolutely dominant in 2022. I mean, he gave up 295 yards per game, just 16 points per game, under 100 yards rushing, 2.9 yards per carry. And you can point your finger directly at that defensive line. Now, last year when I talked to Coach Huff, he said, well, we lost a lot of guys on the defensive front. We're going to be a little different defensively. We're going to try to run a different type of system. Well, this year when I talked to him after last year, took the expected step back. They only they allowed 377 yards per game, 4.3 yards per carry. This year, Coach Huff is bullish on the defensive line, compares it to that 2022 unit led by Michael Green, who might just be the Sun Belt's defensive player of the year. They've got quality guys inside with Gibson and Legs. I'm really most excited about the defensive line. They have depth there as well. They brought in 6 or 7 transfers coming in to add depth to the D-line. And if the defensive line unit is as strong as it was 2 years ago, then I think Marshall would be just as strong.
I tell you what, in true professional form, you beat me to my next question when I was about to ask, were there any players on this Marshall defense that leaped off the page to you? And it does not surprise me that you mentioned Mike Green. Russ, my co-host, and I have repeatedly said that we think Mike Green is the breakout player on this entire Herd roster. And it's not surprising to get the high praise from you that he could be a Sun Belt Defensive Player of the Year type guy. So outside of the defensive line, let's switch it up a little bit. Where will Herd fans see a little bit of concern from this Herd defense?
I think defensive. I like the secondary led by J.J. Roberts. If you're looking for another breakout player, I think he's probably the second best player on the defense. J.J. Roberts should have a big year at the free safety spot. You wonder a little bit about the cornerbacks, but they've got some talent there, and the linebackers look decent with Anderson. But I would say probably the biggest question mark would be cornerback.
Okay. We feel like corner may be okay because we've seen a lot of young guys last year cut their teeth in real time towards the latter half of the season. Concerning to us, obviously, was seeing 4 linebackers hit the transfer portal out within the same week. So it became a real youth movement outside of Jacorian Anderson, who's a 6th-year guy, a lot of snaps with the Herd. So we're curious to see and how that linebacker core shapes out. You mentioned earlier that you picked Marshall tied for second in the East Division with James Madison and Georgia Southern, 2 teams that Marshall will have to visit in 2024. Both those are away games. From the time of printing of the magazine until now, do you still feel like Marshall is a second-place team in the East? Have they done more to strengthen that view in your eyes?
Yeah, I still feel that they're going to tie for second in the East. And, I had Mitch Griffiths projected as a starting quarterback, but that was not the reason I was so high on Marshall. As mentioned, the reason I was so high on Marshall this year is that defensive line. If they return to the dominance they had 2 years ago, I think they're going to be a tough out for any team out there. And in Sunbelt play, I do have a slight dog at Georgia Southern and slight dog at James Madison, but those are almost toss-up games. The App State game at home is going to be big. I think out of those 3 games, if they win just one, 6-2 is probably good enough for second place in the East. So as long as that defensive line lives up to my expectations, I think Marshall's going to be a much better team this year.
Well, good. That's what we like to hear. So it could be one of those couple of games that will decide the overall success rate of the season. So now let's talk about the big elephants in the room here. Marshall has Virginia Tech and Ohio State both in the out of conference in 2024. And of course, that very competitive Sun Belt East Division. What would you say is the floor for this team, given all that?
I would say the worst case scenario for Marshall this year would probably be another 6-6 season. So it's that's losing, of course, to Virginia Tech and Ohio State, which I expect. Those 2 teams are absolutely loaded this year. They're both on the road in front of remarkable environments. I've got the App State as a toss-up game, and at Old Dominion could be a sneaky one at the end of the year. But if you're looking for an absolute floor, I would have to say 6-6 this year.
I'm 6-6 is fair enough because that most likely will land the Herd in another bowl game. But I don't know that that will quiet the Thundering Herd fans who are longing for another championship in Huntington, West Virginia. It's been a while. We've gone to a conference championship game, had an appearance, did not win that one. Obviously, head coach Charles Huff is in the final year of his contract, and we haven't heard anything about an extension yet. I like Charles Huff. I think he's a great guy. I really like the job he's been doing at Marshall. What do you think has to happen for him to get that stamp of approval and get a longer term deal, get an extension? Does Marshall have to make a conference championship to get that done?
I don't know if they have to make the conference championship. I'd say a 6-2 Sun Belt season should be good enough. It would be good enough in my mind. And as far as the ceiling goes for this Marshall team, I mean, I only have a 3-point dog at Georgia Southern and a 3-point dog at James Madison. Those are 2 winnable games. Mm-hmm. Ceiling is 8-0 and Sun Belt championship. So, I mean, when when your floor is 6-6, your ceiling is going 10-2 this year, then I think they're in pretty good shape. And I would say a 6-2 Sun Belt season should be good enough to save Charles Huff.
Awesome. I like to hear that. We'd like to keep a little bit of the continuity going here. Coach Huff has been very kind to us at the ThunderCast and given us a lot of his time over the course of the past couple of years. So, of course, we want to see him do well, not just for him, but also for our fans and ourselves. We're a little selfish. We want to win some games, too. I would like to point out that, of course, Marshall was able to go up to James Madison and get a win at Bridgeforth a couple of years ago. Also, the same story down in Statesboro. We'll see if we can repeat that success. But it's the tough game against Appalachian State, like you mentioned. It will be homecoming for the Herd, and it'll be an early one. Folks really like it when the Herd and App State lock horns, play those tough games. We were able to get App State at home a couple of years ago with a hard-fought win on 75 week. Couldn't get it done in Boone last year. In your opinion, really, is that the game where the Sun Belt season could be, I guess you would say, won or lost for Marshall?
Yeah, I think winning the Sun Belt East, you have to beat App State. And here's a beautiful thing about this matchup. If Marshall's defensive line is as good as I think it is, what is the one weakness App State has this year? It's the offensive line. They only have one starter back. Now, I went over the team with Coach Clark, and he said athletically they're where he wants them to be on the offensive line. They have better length and speed than last year. And he says they could be a surprise unit this season, but it's still young in the year. You have an offensive line that's still trying to get together and mold and itself together. So I think that's a good matchup for Marshall, being on the road in front of a hostile crowd versus a young offensive line. And if Marshall's defensive line dominates, they have an excellent shot of winning that game.
I think that one, I'm with you. That's kind of where the season could be won or lost, and it's not ideal that it is one of the earlier games in the season for Marshall, because it really sets the tone for what could be a special season or could be a long season. But of course, that speaks to the resilience of a Marshall team under Coach Huff this season. Will they be able to bounce back from, say, a hard-fought loss, close loss, or will they be able to sustain that emotional win that could catapult them to a very special season? It's like I said, it's not ideal to have those type of games early in the season. We would much rather have those in November when things are truly on the line. But I'll take what I can get, right? And folks in Huntington will take any scenario that they can get that will put them in contention for a Sun Belt Conference championship. I want to go off of this year's team a little bit, because we wouldn't be talking the Herd if we weren't talking a little bit of history. And I know you are probably quite educated when it comes to the history of the Herd. We just landed our latest college football Hall of Famer in Randy Moss. Phil, we have to talk about the greatness that is Randy Moss. In many people's opinion, he's one of the greatest and some the greatest collegiate wide receiver of all time. When you think about the greats, where does Randy rank for you?
Oh, he's definitely right up there as one of the best in all time. I mean, when you watched him play, it was like a man among boys. He just dominated the field of play, and, of course, took that into the NFL as well. So I think he is one of the greatest receivers of all time, no doubt about it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I know folks like hearing that. We're hoping to land ourselves several more college football Hall of Famers, of course, as the years roll on. Look, I cannot thank you enough for joining me today and talking about the Marshall Thundering Herd, providing such valuable firsthand insight for all of the Thundering Herd universe. But I would love for you to do one more favor for me. Please take a few minutes and tell the folks where they can find you on social media, how they can buy the Phil Steele's College Football Preview magazine, and give us some details on Phil Steele Plus.
I appreciate that, KD. Yeah, the magazine is 352 pages. It's got 2 full pages on every team. We give you the same amount of coverage on Marshall or Akron that we do on Alabama and Texas. 2 full pages, all the information, same spot on every page. It's better than having 134 media guides on your desk, but it's like having 134 media guides, is every bit of information you need to know for the football season is in there. Now, it's only available this year at Barnes & Noble and Books A Million. Those are the 2 brick and mortar stores. So if you're out looking for it, get it before it's sold out. Barnes Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. You can also get the magazine at philsteele.com. And when you go to philsteele.com, I'm going to charge you a shipping charge if you want to buy the hard copy, but I give you the digital magazine for free. And the digital magazine's actually updated all the way through the start of the season. You can follow me on Twitter. It's at PhilSteele042. And when you go to philsteele.com, as you touched on, KD, we've got Phil Steele Plus, which updates the stats all season long, color-coded in green and red, and everything I need to handicap the teams for the season, I have on Phil Steele Plus. Plus, there's my newsletter Inside the Press Box where I give my weekly selection. So Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, or philsteele.com, and check out those daily blogs I have on philsteele.com every day.
I got to tell you, I've been buying the magazine for a number of years. And like I said in the intro, we use it heavily. And I continue to use it throughout the season to familiarize myself with Marshall's weekly opponents. Once again, thank you to Phil Steele, his incredible staff, also for giving us this opportunity to bring unparalleled insight and wisdom directly to you, our listeners. Please be sure to go and buy yourself a copy of Phil Steele's college football preview. You will not regret it. It is the absolute best source of information to get you prepared for the college football season each and every year. I highly recommend that you also become a member at philsteele.com, especially if you love diving into advanced type stats. Listen, join us later in the week as position group breakdowns continue on the ThunderCast. Until then, we'll see you around the Joan. Later.